I'm Emily Earp, and today I'm with Dr. John Hostetler, infectious disease physician here at Harbin Clinic. And today we are going to be discussing the COVID-19 vaccine, its safety, its effectiveness, and common questions that you might have. Thank you for being here with us. As an infectious disease physician, what is it that you do day in and day out, especially as it relates to this past year with this pandemic and COVID-19?
Well, sure. As an infectious disease doctor, actually, it's complicated, and even my parents never understood what I do. But day to day, we're asked to see people who have infectious diseases, quite obviously, and not usually garden variety, but unusual infections. People who are, run a variety of different symptoms and signs that suggest infections. Sometimes they're not infections. But come March, when March came around, we had a whole different ballgame, and we knew something was going on. We had heard in the press, and some of these first cases I was involved with were astounding. This was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and it was quite distressing because we didn't feel like we had a lot to offer other than supportive care. Not that that isn't important, but this is a very, very aggressive virus and very frustrating to deal with because we don't have really effective treatments. We've come a long ways. We can use steroids and so forth that help. But Dr. Postigo and I and Leslie Kay and Lauren Vines, day to day, we are in the battle for these infections and trying to get people over them. And we would love to never see another one again. And that's why I'm here. I'm hoping I can play some small role in that.
Well, thank you for being here with us. Let's talk a little bit about the SARS-CoV-2 virus. What is this virus and how does it impact individuals?
So SARS-CoV-2 is a coronavirus. Coronaviruses have been known to cause upper respiratory infections, but the SARS-CoV-2 shares much more in common with two other much more dangerous viruses, one called SARS-1. Approximately 20 years ago, this came on the scene and was devastating for those who got infected, but fortunately it got snuffed out after about a year. And second was MERS. MERS still actually exists in pockets in the Middle East, but it's not nearly as contagious as the current SARS-CoV-2. That
does it impact the individuals who contract the virus?
So SARS-CoV-2 causes the disease that that is known as COVID-19. So that's the disease that this virus causes. And this is a respiratory virus that is quite, as we've said, aggressive. It gets into your body's immune cells. It causes primarily respiratory illness, but it also affects multiple systems of the body. It can go to the heart, it can go to the lungs, the vascular system, basically any organ you can name can potentially be affected by this virus. But the main issue for most cases, particularly the severe cases, is the pulmonary aspect of it, where it can cause a devastating pneumonia.
There seems to be some concern about the speed at which the vaccine was developed. Can you speak to this and why it's still safe to take the vaccine even though it was developed pretty quickly?
Be glad to. So I like to break it down into three main reasons. One is development of the technology. Second is the ability to make the vaccine quickly. And third was the ability to scale up a phase 3 trial. To the first point, we've actually had this technology a long time. The U.S. was developing this and other countries as well back in the mid-2000s. And at the point that coronavirus became a thing, there were already 12 different clinical trials going on with other mRNA vaccines at the time. So the technology was not brand new. We were already developing it, and the stars just aligned. It was just a matter of plugging in the sequence for the virus, which we got a year ago in January, so we could create the vaccine with existing technology. Second thing is that messenger RNA vaccines are very easy to manufacture quickly. You may think of the flu vaccine. We have to grow it up in chicken embryos, and we have to then sort of inactivate the virus. And there are a lot of different steps in producing even just the flu vaccine. we were able to cut through all that with this mRNA vaccine to just directly produce messenger RNA without needing genetically altered organisms in the process. So it makes itself very easy to manufacture fast. Third, and very critical, was the Operation Warp Speed you may have heard of. So in the past, pharmaceutical companies had to foot the bill and the risk of developing a vaccine. And that took years. It took a lot of effort, but it was often done much more slowly to minimize risk, financial risk, to the pharmaceutical companies. So the U.S. government decided we're going to take away that risk. We're going to say, go ahead and develop this and start doing your safety trials once you've figured out that it's safe in small groups of patients, and scale it up, and we're going to fund that for you. So you're not going to have to worry about the risk. So that sort of opened the door, opened the floodgates to scaling up the clinical phase of the trials. And because of that, we were able to very quickly conduct trials that involved 70,000 patients, and that was over about a month of people being accrued. Beginning last July, let's remember, this was 6 months ago that trial started. The actual amount of safety data on this trial or these two trials between the two vaccines, was actually very similar to every other vaccine that has ever been developed. It was just done at an earlier time point in the research phase. So the FDA people, Paul Offit at the FDA has said that the safety data and the amount of patients that were put in these trials was no different than any other vaccine that we are already used to using.
To piggyback off of that, are there any long-term effects to this vaccine? I've heard that question a couple times too.
Sure. A valid question. First off, I'm going to quote Paul Offit again on the FDA panel, and the general principle here is that the side effects of vaccines can virtually always be seen in the first 6 weeks or so of introduction. That's been true going back for many years. So there was a lot of confidence when we got past that point that we were not going to see anything long term. I think it's also important to know that this vaccine doesn't stay in your body. The messenger RNA disappears after it tells your cells to produce this protein. It is gone, and so is the little fat particle that is stabilizing it. It's gone, and the polypropylene glycol, that little dissolvent there, is gone too. All these things are metabolized very quickly, so there's no part of this vaccine that stays. The only thing that stays is your immune response. That stays, the memory cells, the ability to make antibodies quickly when you are exposed to the virus. That's what hangs on.
In layman's terms, can you explain what an mRNA vaccine is and how it's different from a live virus vaccine, a weakened virus vaccine? Does it change or alter our DNA? All of those questions.
Sure. So the main point of a vaccine is to stimulate your immune response, right? Your body needs to see this vaccine and, the proteins of the virus and react to it, right? So most vaccines have been developed using live viruses or viruses that were killed that express these proteins that were given as a shot, and then your immune system takes over and responds to them and provides immunity. So there's sort of a middleman in those vaccines where you have either a virus that's killed or a virus that you have to grow up in the laboratory in order to make those proteins. Here we kind of get rid of the middleman. We actually give the instructions to produce that protein directly. There's no culturing, no live organism. So with the vaccine, you basically get a template of virus mRNA, messenger RNA, and your body takes that and develops just the protein on the virus, not whole virus, but just the protein that's expressed on the cells. It induces an immune response that evidently is quite robust, and then that messenger RNA that started that process is gone. So there's no lasting effect of the mRNA, just the protein itself that produces a reaction, and even that goes away after a period of time. So there's The whole thing produced a very nice response without having to grow up cells and genetically alter organisms.
In protecting against COVID-19, what are the benefits of getting the vaccine?
So the vaccine exceeded all expectations. It actually turned out to be amazing. We were raising our eyebrows. So 95% efficacy in these clinical trials. The trials involved about 70,000 people, about 40,000 got the vaccine, and only about 5% actually experienced a viral infection. And the infections that did occur were relatively mild. People were not hospitalized. They did not have these extreme reactions that we now see.
Can you speak to some of the adverse reactions that someone might get after receiving the shot? And is this more dangerous than getting COVID itself is a common question.
Sure. So the vaccine is going to, in most cases, cause a sore arm. We just know this. We're not going to hide anything about that. Most of the time, there's just going to be a sore arm. Some people have headaches. Some people have muscle aches. Those are very common, but they also last anywhere from hours to approximately 2 days at the most. A very small percentage, about 15%, actually has experienced a low-grade fever, and that can be confusing to people, but it's still 1 to 2 days, and almost universally, the symptoms were gone. What we don't see are cough and respiratory symptoms, so that helps us distinguish side effects from the vaccine from the actual virus itself. So as we have gone further down the road with this, the vaccine was introduced in about mid-December, and I'm proud to say I'm one of the ones that got it. And have had my second dose. I had that 3 days ago. The CDC has looked back now at the first 10 days the vaccine was given, and they published their findings. 1.8 million people got it in 10 days. 1.8 million. And so out of that 1.8 million, there were 21 episodes of what we would call anaphylaxis. So anaphylaxis is a reaction that can happen most of the time within about the first 15 minutes of the vaccine, up to 30 minutes was the vast majority. And this accounts for why we ask people to hang around that long after the vaccine. So of those 21, there were 4 hospitalizations and for observation, and everybody went home who got admitted, and there were no long-term effects. So the key is at the vaccine centers, they have epinephrine. If one has an early reaction, they can treat it very quickly.
That kind of brings me to my next question. Is there anybody that shouldn't take the vaccine right now? Those that have allergic reactions, those who are currently sick, women who are pregnant, what are those instances? Yeah,
I'm going to go back to the anaphylactic group. So of those 21, about 17% actually had a history of allergies of one kind or another. But that's still 17 out of 1.8 million. So you know that many other people got this vaccine who had a history of allergies. So we would not say just because you've had allergies that you should not take this vaccine. I want to get that out of the way. So who shouldn't? Well, CDC states that only if you have a history of an allergy to one of the components of the vaccine, those 3 items that I mentioned, the mRNA, the polypropylene glycol, and the lipid. Now, those haven't been used in other vaccines, so we really don't have, most people aren't going to have an experience of having an allergy to one of the components. So what about people who are pregnant, people who are immune compromised? That's probably our biggest issue here. So the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists have come out with a statement stating that people who are pregnant or planning to become pregnant should not be deprived of the vaccine. So that's sort of a backhanded way of endorsing the vaccine without saying, well, we have this large study that says it's safe. We don't have a large study that says it's safe in pregnancy, but we have a lot of science behind the vaccine that gives us every reason to think it is safe in pregnancy. Let's go back to the fact that there are no live viruses in the making of this vaccine. It simply stimulates an immune response. Let's remember that lots of vaccines are actually given in pregnancy, such as the flu vaccine, tetanus vaccine. A lot of other vaccines are given safely in pregnancy. The only class of vaccines we avoid in pregnancy are live vaccines. And this is not a live vaccine. So we have every reason to believe it will be safe in pregnancy. ACOG feels the same way. And let's face it, if you get COVID and you're pregnant, you face a 5-fold increased risk of being hospitalized. You face an increased risk of miscarriages. The morbidity is significantly higher if you acquire COVID during pregnancy. In a lot of things in life, we have to weigh risks and benefits. The vaccine, by all the scientists' assessment, it looks like it will be safe in pregnancy. So what about people who are immune compromised? So many would say they need it more than anyone, right? So if you're immune compromised, it means you're at greater risk for complications when you have an infectious disease. And we'll go back to saying this is not a live vaccine, so you cannot get COVID from the vaccine itself, but it should help protect you from getting it when your immune system is down. There are issues with timing and chemotherapy. You need to talk to your doctor about that. Because there are optimal times to give it, but as a general rule, it's not contraindicated in people who have weak immune systems. Quite the contrary, it would be recommended, I think, in that group.
I've got a little bit of a scientific question, yes. So if you can try to answer in more simple terms. But how does this vaccine work in terms of inducing an immune response to the virus that causes COVID-19?
Okay, so you've all seen pictures of this virus. It has these little spiky things on the surface, right? We learned from SARS-1 and MERS that those are the most important source for our immune response. We need to form antibodies against those little spiky things. So in order to do that, we have to make them ourselves, right? So the vaccine produces the protein, which is those spiky proteins. And when your body sees those, it creates a very robust response, both T cells and B cells. We form antibodies and memory cells, and all that pulls into play. And then, so the next time when your body sees the real thing, those B cells and T cells are primed and they're ready, and they're going to produce what they do. They're going to do what they do to fight back with antibodies against those proteins.
Once you receive the vaccine, we're told that you could still get COVID, but symptoms will be less or you'll be asymptomatic. So therefore, are people still at risk to infect others even though they've had the vaccine?
So once you've had both doses of vaccine, yes, we know that there's a 95% efficacy against symptomatic infection, right? So, and of those 5%, the few that actually had infections, they were very mild infections. There is still a question about perhaps you might still have infection and never have symptoms because they were not counted, right? They only looked at symptomatic cases. So there's a small, at least theoretical chance that you might still have infection and never know it. And because of that, you might give it to other people. We will get the answer to that, and it's being looked at. But right now, we have to assume that it's theoretically possible that some people with the vaccine can give it to others without ever knowing they have the disease.
There are some questions around the virus changing or new strands popping up, and that this COVID vaccine might be something that we take annually or seasonally, similar to a flu vaccine. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I'll try. So the current thinking on that is that the mutations that would be required in order to skirt the vaccine would be way more extensive than what we're seeing so far. And so right now it's not thought that that's likely to happen, at least on a regular basis, like the flu, which is way more genetically malleable. So every season we can get different flu strains. Coronavirus doesn't seem to mutate to that extent. That may change. But right now, even the two strains we know of, there's the UK strain and there's a South African strain, scientists think, especially with the UK strain, that we will still be immune with the vaccine. But it is more reason to get ourselves vaccinated quickly because you have to have a lot of people sick in order to have those mutations. So if you don't get the infection in the first place, there's not going to be any mutation. So we really need to get the vaccine out fast.
For those that have already had COVID, there's a lot of, I've already had it, I don't need to get the vaccine. What would you say to that statement? Should you still get the vaccine even if you've already had COVID, you've recovered, you're feeling fine? What should those people do?
Right, so great question. COVID infection itself seems to be highly protective for 90, and now they're starting to say 180 days, 6 months. And it may be longer. We're not sure. So your odds of getting COVID again, at least in that time frame, is extremely small. So when you hear about, well, wait 90 days, that is not to say that the vaccine's dangerous or you shouldn't get it. It's just that we know you don't really need it in that time frame. And we have so many people that have no immunity that really need it. So that's more why that answer is being provided right now. However, many of the scientists are saying that the response to the vaccine seems to be more robust than actual coronavirus infection itself. COVID-19 actually suppresses the immune system in some ways, and not everybody forms a good antibody response to it. But the vaccine itself is very targeted. All it's doing is telling your body to make antibodies to the spike protein, and it makes a lot of different antibodies to the spike protein. So it seems that after the second shot, you have a more robust response, and we hope that that will translate into more durable immunity in the long term. Perhaps more than infection itself, but we really don't know the answer. It's all theoretical right now.
Wow, yeah. Well, Dr. John Hostetler, thank you so much for spending your time with me today and answering all these questions. Is there any other message that you would like to share?
I think many people may feel like they're guinea pigs here with this vaccine. I want to remind you that we're now up to 4 million doses, and the trials were 70,000 patients, 40,000 people receive the vaccine, and it is showing itself to be very, very safe and very effective. So what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for our friends to see how they do? The data is just astounding how effective this is and how safe it is. It's a little bit, to me, it's almost like going to Las Vegas. You know, you got $100 and you're going to go to Las Vegas, and you know, if you're not going to take the vaccine, it's a little bit of a gamble, right? You know, you're going to say, you know, if I don't get the vaccine, if you're a winner here, the win is things are status quo. You don't get the virus, you know, and somehow you gambled and it never bothered you, never affected anybody. So yeah, that's kind of a win. Well, to me, that means you get to keep your $100, right? Well, you didn't really make a whole lot on that. Yes, you didn't get a shot in your arm, and that was a little inconvenient. But on the downside, what is the downside? What if that gamble goes the other way and you actually get infection while you're waiting to see how things go? Maybe you won't have a serious case, maybe you will. Maybe you won't even know you had it, but you infected somebody else. Maybe your parents, maybe your grandparents. Somebody could die if that decision is made to hold off. I mean, the stakes are actually very high. And we have to not lose sight of that. So just please trust the science. We all feel like, many of us who are familiar with how the vaccine is made, we trust it. I can't think of a doctor I know that wouldn't take this vaccine. And I can think of some who got sick who wish they had. I think the physician community is all behind this, and I hope you would be too, and encourage people. This is the only way we're going to get past this.
That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. Great.
Glad to.
Well, thank you. And as a good reminder, continue to wash your hands, wear a mask, and watch your distance.